for all of us today. We're all courageous in our own way, and thank you so much. So the opportunity to share and have conversations will happen at the conclusion of Samantha, which is what we call our think tank. There will be small groups broken up, as I explained in the beginning, and you'll have one of the facilitators then will engage in the conversations where we will actually start to think about how can you be more of an ally within this community? How can we, each of us, play the part of an ally? And so those conversations and discussions will happen in that think tank forum, and then we'll come back to the larger group where we can share some of the actions that people have decided that may also enhance and give you the opportunity to put some actions into practice as well. So our third speaker for today is Samantha.
Morning, everybody. My name's Samantha Webster. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a Brit who ended up moving to Australia in '99 with my Australian partner. In between that, I'd traveled to the US and lived in New York for a couple of years. So I do regard myself as a global citizen, and I do see myself as someone that lives within the global community. And what's really interesting about this morning is neither Celia or Felipe's content was necessarily shared with our BBG forum in detail, and yet we've all come up with pretty much similar themes around authenticity and visibility more than anything, because depending on how old you are, a lot of your life has been potentially very invisible and very unsafe. And so we don't have a lot of time to really unpack this, but as a D&I professional, I'm going to try and take you through some of the things that might make not only your own individual lives better in the workplace, but coming back to the themes that Felipe and Celia mentioned, thinking about how you can be an active ally as an individual. And it's really important, the actual change agent is you first, not the organization, not the mission statement, as we've already heard, but you are the active, living and breathing change agent. And so I'd really like to thank this opportunity. And before we move forward, thanks, Denise, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm sitting on today, which is the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present in the community today on this call, and also any First Nations people. So yeah, thanks very much. So really, we're going to talk really briefly about how visibility can drive authentic relationships. And for some people that are not familiar with why does that make sense and why is that important, I'm going to try and step through some of the concepts that may help you understand why individuals will hide and self-edit. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And also how maybe you can help build inclusive cultures through things that you do, or as a group, or as an organization. And I'll warn you now, I could talk my way out of a paper bag, so I'm going to be as quick as I can, but I am also a trainer, so I'm used to unpacking all these slides. And unfortunately, we haven't got the opportunity at this moment to pause for questions coming back, although Denise and Ivan are doing the chat. So Denise, you mentioned something at the very beginning around tolerance or acceptance. And we often use the word inclusion interchangeably with, well, we accept somebody because we tolerate what they believe in, and yet the word inclusion is really different. And I just wonder if we could have a look at the differences. And it's really important that we understand the difference. So diversity is a fact, and it's the attributes of what makes up the diversity. So if you want to just click the next one, please, Denise. So it really is the difference between who we are. And I think, Felipe, you introduced yourself as tall and bald and gay and black and male and cisgender and everything else. So the diversity of the attributes, but the inclusion is the human act. And just one more, please, Denise. And it really is about what can we do to actually feel someone included. So I can invite you into a party, but then nobody actually talks to you. And so just because you've been invited into the demographic of the people within that party, it's when someone comes up and says, would you like a drink, or would you like to join my group? And it takes a human act, and you can't be passive and be inclusive at the same time. Does that make sense? So I guess the two ways you can think about it is diversity is the act and inclusion, diversity is the fact and inclusion is the act. And it helps separate why we've now gone from diverse workforces to diverse and inclusive workforces. And in fact, we're moving away from really just focusing on inclusion and driving the behavior to make sure people feel like they belong. And there's lots of expressions in Australia, and we're really privileged, Celia and Felipe and everybody else in other jurisdictions around the world, that we live in a much safer place than some people do, and therefore we can be visible and we can walk around with our lanyards and our pins in certain circumstances. But visibility is key. And for those that are Brené Brown fans, she talks about the power of vulnerability and also the courage to show up and be seen. And I think we can't control other people's behavior. We can't control the environment that we're in. But what we can do is, if we're in a situation where we've built our ally network and we know that we've got allies because we are seeing visible symbols, then we could be a bit braver and have the courage to show up and be seen. But it's really important. Otherwise, coming back to the conversations we've already had, if we stay hidden, then people are not going to learn and they won't understand and then include the difference. Does that make sense? So why stay hidden? I'm hoping this will come up. So this is a map produced by the International Lesbian and Gay Association, and it basically covers the full transgender community as well, and all the LGBT plus around the world. But this map is one of the reasons why people still are unsafe to be themselves and unsafe to be visible. So if you look at the criminalization, so we had our marriage equality approved and legalized in 2017. And up until then, we weren't able to marry the person that we loved. And even up until 2013, we weren't protected in the workplace. So the Sex Discrimination Act was only amended in Australia in 2013. So there was, for us as employees, we didn't have the support of organizations because there was no legal recourse. And then fast forward to 2017, we do have the legal right to marry now, but we don't have the death penalty in Australia. And we also are not imprisoned because of our identity or sexual orientation. But if you look at this map, people stay hidden because it's a personal safety, and it's often a matter of life and death. So from an employer's point of view, if you're trying to be inclusive and make sure that people that work for you are safe, the last thing you want to do then is actually send them on a work assignment to any of the hotspots around the world that will either imprison you, criminalize you for being you, and potentially at risk of receiving a death penalty. And so people are very comfortable in more evolved countries that might have the protections against discrimination based on orientation. And yet we've still got lots and lots of jurisdictions around the world that are very threatening to the LGBTQ community. So these are the things that people don't necessarily know about because it's not part of their everyday knowledge and experience. So let's have a look at what influences visibility. And you can click on both just for time's sake from here. So when people say, when did you come out, Sam? And I'll say, well, I came out to myself in 1988 after 4 years of, oh no, what's going on? And I think I'm attracted to a woman, and I'm going to be subject to other people's hatred, and it will pass, and all these kind of things. And yet when you look at why people stay invisible, they don't feel safe necessarily because they haven't got to the place of their own identity. And Celia mentioned the dysphoria. The dysphoria can come on at any time for the trans and gender diverse community, and it can really impact their sense of identity and their sense of internalized stigma. And so it's really important to break all that internalized stigma down, and also minimize aspects of physical risk, emotional risk. And the environment that you grow up in might be very unsafe as well. When you hear really derogatory comments, or you see it through your culture or your beliefs and faiths and religions reinforce that anything different and anything from the LGBTQ community is not acceptable and is abhorrent, etc. And so for self, we remain visible or invisible depending on the components of our lived experience. And if you flip it over to the rest of the world, as in, sorry, Denise, go back, stay there, just looking at the rest of the community beyond you as the individual, we as people come with our own prejudices, our own biases, our assumptions and stereotypes. We're exposed to different attitudes that might be different to other people, but they might actually exacerbate the fact that it's not safe to be me, it's not safe to come out, and whatever that means to you. And also people that are born into privilege and have privilege bestowed upon them, they are not necessarily aware of what other people are going through. And so one of the things that we encourage in the workplace, and so the work that I do with organizations is breaking down privilege and perception of privilege, and not as a shaming and naming, but really a walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, and also having a perspective of how people get here and the gap between where you are and where somebody might be, and the disadvantage that they might be experiencing. And so when we talk about, and I think Celia, you mentioned intersection, and so you can have an assumed identity because you might look gay or someone thinks that you're trans, and again it's all assumption, because until you have confirmed whether you have that identity and not everybody else is going on their stereotypes, etc. But add another layer of complexity around your own identity, but the intersection of other attributes as well, whether that's, race, gender, age, ability, etc. And people with intersectional attributes as well experience far greater discrimination in the workplace. And it's one of the reasons why, when you look at the reason what organizations have what's called diversity councils, and they certainly do in Australia for the companies that are investing in the D&I space. And in those diversity councils, they'll have representatives of the disadvantaged groups and or minority groups. But bringing together the commonality is really important. So if you look at the white box in the middle, some of the respondents from the Out at Work survey said, the 6 common themes were about, experiencing racism and homophobia, being someone from a culturally and linguistically diverse community, having English as a second language, having the differences between privilege in the metro versus the regional and remote areas. And for people that are not from Australia, we have the layer of our Aboriginality community, and the Aboriginality and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia have a very different experience to our Anglo-Saxon privilege in the major cities, in the regions, and some places remote parts of Australia as well. So, and again, coming back to criminalisation and being accepted at work and not at home. So one of the reasons why there's such a shift in the workplace is because we spend most of our time there. And if you go back to that map before, not you, Denise, but in your head, you'll see that you could have even come across from another country. You could have come over from, the Middle East or Brunei or wherever, and your family culture and your family attitude comes with you, but you're residing, say, in Australia. But your home life still resembles the country that you came from. And if the LGBTQ community are demonized, persecuted, criminalized in your country of origin, then you're not safe necessarily at home either. So work is typically the safest place for you. And that's why a sense of belonging is key. And that's what we're all trying to work towards. Without laboring the stats, because there's lots and lots, when you think about how you're experiencing discrimination in the workplace, it can be so simple as deliberately misgendering someone that might have a trans history or a trans experience and refusing to use pronouns that they have asked you to use. It might be that people have been discriminated because of their gender identity and sexuality, that is different to what the cultural norm of the organization is. It might feel like where you've had your educational setting, you are still not someone that belonged. And I think, Felipe, you mentioned about the culture in Brazil, and the fact that if it's got a very strong, dominant, faith-based theme through that culture as well, then it's really hard to break free of that. And so there's lots and lots of stats as to why the workplace can be safe, but it can also be very unsafe. And so it's our responsibility as allies to each other, whether you're in the LGBTQ community or not, to at least challenge our own biases, challenge your own assumptions. And I think, Denise, you mentioned being open to learning. Being out can mean different things. It's a really individual experience, and it's an individual journey. And it certainly was for me. And everybody, you know, it's a phenomena that it occurs because we have what's called the heteronormative binary. And very briefly, that says in the world, about 89% of the population, according to surveys, as in census data, say that we are typically born male, female. And when I say typically, this is the binary, identify as man, woman, express as feminine or masculine, and are attracted to the opposite sex. And yet there's this cohort of people around the world, millions and millions and millions of us, that don't fit within the heteronormative binary. And the reason people feel they have to come out is because the binary exists. So look the word up, read some of the concepts behind it, and understand that not everything in life is from a binary perspective, and that there's fluidity, and there always has been through different cultures, different generations, all through history. But the visibility is where it's key, because it was hidden historically. We now need to embrace that difference, and those that are not within the heteronormative binary to say, it's just like a language. There are lots of other languages in the world. There's not just two. It's just like ice cream flavors. There's lots of ice cream flavors, not just two. And we need to start thinking about, I'm a cisgender white gay woman, and I have privilege because of certain attributes, but I still fit within that LGBTQ community. So part of my identity is binary, the other part is not. So it's important to understand how people are made up and just allow them to be themselves and not a fixed way of being. And just a quick overview. For me, when I look at the outing, I was outed in my first teaching job, and it was mortifying for me because I wasn't out to anybody else, and I'd only just come out to myself, and a pupil outed me. And luckily I had a really amazing head teacher and head of department, and she supported me, even though for me as a teacher at the time, being outed was really quite dangerous. And then I came out to Mum before I moved to New York, and I certainly didn't come out to Dad. I said, that's your job, because I didn't have that relationship with my dad. And then I came out and I found my community in New York between 91 and 92. And often you'll find when family is not accepting and community is not accepting and inclusive, you will find a new family, and work can be that family. And so again, coming back to the importance of building the fabric of inclusive culture from the ground up in the workplace. And I've had varying experiences through my working career of being out fully, partially, slightly. And people will say to me, when did you come out? And without being glib and cheeky, I actually can say I come out pretty much every day, or I'm forced to make a decision, because depending on the questions people ask, what brought you to Australia? Why are you over here? I see you're wearing a ring. I have two or three options. I can lie. I can use neutral pronouns when I'm talking about my partner, or I can come out. And it can challenge people all the time if that's what they experience every day. Now, we're lucky in Australia because we are seeing a huge swell of embracing of inclusion and people really wanted to make a difference, but it's not everybody. So again, let's just assume that we've just got to be as best an inclusive person as possible when we're engaging with anybody. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about culture in the workplace. So the intersectionality, again, is when those multiple aspects of diversity intersect to form that one identity, I guess. So some of the impacts could be identity, accessibility, culture and race, religion. I know people that have been in the workplace that have stayed hidden and have self-edited and not told anybody, for instance, about their pregnancy for 6 months, because they did not want to be judged as a woman who was about to have a baby and may have been in a senior role, and they go, oh, that'll be right, she's going to disappear now. Oh, sorry, she's going to disappear now. You know, so people, you know, who have been pregnant have hid their identity. People that have experienced domestic family violence will keep that a secret and self-edit. People with any health challenges will also, you know, feel the impact of who they are and some of the things that they're dealing with as well. So there's lots of impacts around that inclusion and the intersection of it. So authenticity through visibility is really key. And I'm going to just leave you with a couple of, I guess, bubbles of thought and where you can make the decision. But if you are a leader on this call, and in fact, we're all leaders, aren't we? But if you're a leader on this call, it's important to think about how can you drive the culture? And that's not just macro, but micro. I'm muted, there we go. It happens. So I don't know if you can see my lanyard, but I've got lots of different pins. I've got the bisexual pin, the trans community pin, I've got the intersex community, and we could go on and talk a lot about why we've got the flags. You'll also see my pronoun pin. So when I walk down the street or when I'm in the workplace, people can see that I'm an ally to my community. And again, my identity is just one facet of the LGBTQ community. And so, and interestingly, I was interviewing this week over in Perth, and the CEO that I met on Monday, without prompting, walked in with his rainbow lanyard. And so, you know, we went through the hour conversation, and at the end I said to him, I said, I'm really appreciative of you wearing the rainbow lanyard. And I said, and you know, if we were in any other situation, but especially because I'm in an interview, I know that I can be safe and authentic with you because you've given me a non-verbal symbol of inclusion before we've even started the interview. And it was, and for anybody that relates to the power and the safety of the rainbow flag, it isn't just about being out loud and colorful. It really is about safety first and foremost. And you know, in the old days, you know, you would always look for some sign, whether it was the pink triangle or a rainbow flag, from any of the bars or the hostels and the hotels that you were trying to book when you're on holiday, because that was the first point of safety, and then you navigated your way out. And so people are like, well, why should I just wear a badge, or why should I wear a symbol? It's actually a tiny effort for you, but it has a massive knock-on effect for the individual or the community that's working in and around you. And we talk about days of celebration. So when you want to be an ally, show up to those events. We've just had the Trans Day of Visibility. Did anybody turn up to the online events or the face-to-face events, or did anyone join in the discussion? And those are the things that you want to be doing. And that's what your leadership should be doing as well. And then let's get into the policies and make sure that they're not discriminatory, and they're not just assuming everybody's a mother or a father, but they're looking at different ways that parents can parent in our rainbow community. And also coming back to your point, Felipe, about your recruitment and how we can bring the most disadvantaged people into employment. The trans and gender diverse community have the highest levels of unemployment out of the whole of the LGBTQ plus community, and securing long-term and meaningful employment is huge. And so we need to break down our recruitment practices as well. And there's lots of biases from a technology point of view, but from a human point of view, that screen people out from our community. So there's lots of things you can unpack. And the upswing is the exponential reward when people feel safe at work, feel they can be their authentic selves. You'll have spikes in productivity. You'll have huge spikes in creativity, team cohesion, brand loyalty, productivity, everything that you think that you are in the workplace. All of that's on hyperdrive when you feel safe and you can be your authentic self and be visible. So just a sort of takeaway before we break out into the think tank. So if you think about the sort of key headings, make sure that you've got your champions, make sure you build your ally community. And that can be for you know, across any aspect of your workplace. Really get to the nitty-gritty of those policies and make sure they're inclusive, and start to rewrite and improve, and reach out to the practitioners that are on this call and beyond for best practice. And tell the story. So we are sharing stories today. Sharing stories, breaking bread, giving that lived experience is really critical, because it is about walking an inch in somebody else's shoes. And if you are an organization, start to measure where you're at today, benchmark how people feel in your organization, and start to put the building blocks of improvement from that survey data, and obviously anecdotal evidence as well, and support and throw money at wherever you can get it, and include your volunteer community, but try and invest in building these initiatives so that the intersection of your workforce all feel like they belong, not just those that are the dominant visible culture that we see in most workplaces. And I'd like to thank Felipe and Cecilia in particular for being really authentic and brave on this call, and also being ultimately visible to all of us in the forum today. So thank you very much.